started. Okay. Hello, welcome to the continuation of the conditional use hearing regarding the Devon Creek development. This conditional use hearing is being conducted by the East Lampeter Township Board of Supervisors. My name is Corey Meyer and I'm the chairman. I want to inform all participants that this meeting is being recorded. Due to the COVID-19 virus, the Lancaster County's designation of being in the yellow phase of reopening, in-person attendance for this meeting is being limited to a maximum of 25 people in the meeting room. Therefore, this meeting is also being offered virtually utilizing Zoom, which is a cloud-based platform for remote video and audio conferencing. Those participating in the meeting in person will maintain social distancing in the meeting room. The Zoom application is free to the public. The general public is therefore able to join the meeting by connection through the internet or by calling in by phone. The township is expecting to utilize this vehicle for all future public hearings and meetings during and after the COVID-19 crisis. Please continue to check the township website calendar for any updates related to these public meetings. Agendas for public meetings will also be available on the township's website and will be posted on the front of the township building. Other board members joining me in the room while observing social distancing are Supervisor Dave Buckwalter, Vice Chair John Blowers, and Supervisor Ethan Demi. Also participating to support the board and present in the meeting room is Township Solicitor Susan Pfeiffer. Let's see. I'll have Susan discuss public comments in a second. We'll now proceed with the conditional use hearing. I'll now have Solicitor Pfeiffer review the hearing process and also the comments.
Okay.
Thanks.
This is a continued conditional use hearing that was started on March 18th, 2019. The board will continue to hear the case in a somewhat informal manner. When we begin, we'll ask the applicant if there's any further testimony that you wish to offer. Township staff has also entered their appearance through counsel, and if they have testimony or exhibits they wish to offer, they will be accepted as well. Anyone who will give testimony or who expects to make a statement for or against the application this evening will be sworn or affirmed prior to making a statement. The testimony is being recorded stenographically. It's also being recorded on Zoom. Consequently, it's important that only one person speak at a time. We will ask that if anyone is participating by Zoom and if you wish to make a statement or offer testimony, we are going to ask you to turn on your video before doing so. Again, when we begin, we'll have the applicant have any of their witnesses sworn in who may be presenting evidence. You'll present your testimony, be subject to questions from members of the board, from township staff through council, and from anyone who's interested in the application. We'll go through that process. Anyone offering testimony will be subject to that same set of rules. When all the testimony has been completed, the board will consider voting upon the application. The board must vote upon a decision within 45 days after the completion of the hearing.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good evening. Just for the record, Rob Lewis from Kaplan Stewart, and I'm the attorney for Brookfield Development. It certainly seems a world away since we were last here on this matter back in March of last year. The board will permit me just a brief opening statement. I think it'll really help us get to the heart of the matter.
Sure.
Take as little time as possible tonight. We're here tonight, as your solicitor pointed out, with a continued conditional hearing that began on March 18th, 2019, a hearing on the application of Brookfield Development seeking an amendment to the June 17th, 2008 conditional use approval for Devon Creek. Specifically, we have requested an amendment to allow the change of the public water service supplier for phases 2 through 4 of Devon Creek. The board likely recalls back in 2019, we put on extensive testimony and submitted 15 exhibits at that time, detailing what really had transpired in terms of public water service for Devon Creek between that 2008 conditional use approval and 2015, which is when Brookfield sought final approval for phase 2. I don't intend to go back over all of that tonight with you, but certainly if the board had questions or wanted to have anything refreshed, we're happy to do so. Suffice it to say that the summary of all of that was that when we went for phase 2 final approval and sought a certificate from the city of Lancaster to provide public water service, they refused to do so for the remainder of the project. As a result of that, Brookfield sought an alternative public water supplier for the remainder of the project. And so in 2019, we put on testimony and exhibits regarding Brookfield's intention to provide public water service. Thanks. Put on public water service to the development by way of an on-site well-served system. The hearing in 2019 was paused at the conclusion of Brookfield's case in chief to allow the township and particularly their staff the opportunity to digest the evidence and the testimony that we had presented and determine at that time whether or not they wished to present any evidence themselves or if they had any further questions for our witnesses. That pause in the hearing led to several meetings between the township and Brookfield's team, township's consultants reviewing the information and discussing their questions with our team. Ultimately, it was determined that many of the township's remaining questions could and would really only ever be answered through the review of the public water supply permit application, which we did make a part of the record previously. But as that went through the DEP approval process, DEP being the sole authority to permit and regulate public water supplies in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. As you can tell, that was a very long process going through the DEP review. But ultimately, on February 24th of this year, DEP did in fact approve Brookfield's application. The application was Exhibit A12, and now we have been issued a public water supply permit. I have placed in front of each of the board members, handed to council for the township, a copy of that permit dated February 24th, 2020. And I would like to mark that as applicant's Exhibit A16. Copy of that permit was provided to the township and township staff. And at that time, we actually requested resumption of this hearing so Brookfield could proceed with the remainder of Devon Creek. Yet again, our timing on this project was perfect. And about 2 weeks after having that permit in hand, after all that time, we all went into lockdown under Governor Wolf's emergency declaration in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So one, I want to say thank you to the board for scheduling this hearing, coming out tonight and letting us conclude this. The only other piece of information I would like to add to the record at this time is what I have placed in front of the board and marked as applicant's Exhibit A17. A17 is simply a fully executed copy of what was previously marked as applicant's A8, and that is the service agreement between Brookfield and the city of Lancaster, because you'll recall that there is an emergency backup system that is supplied through the city of Lancaster, and that's the agreement governing that emergency backup system. I do believe that my prior witnesses, Chris Vanarchik and Larry Miller, as well as a representative of Brookfield, are available by Zoom, and I have seen them on the screen. So if the board did have specific questions remaining, we could certainly call on them. But otherwise, I don't really have any direct testimony, I believe, to present this evening. I do believe that the township may have a document that we have negotiated that they'd like to make a part of the record. Okay.
In anticipation that there may be questions, why don't we have your three witnesses sworn in and identified now?
Excellent. Can we unmute Chris Vanarchik from RGS? Larry Miller, I believe, is on as well. And lastly, we have Bill Briegel, who's top left. Larry, if you could please unmute yourself. There you go.
You want it? Yep, you can do it.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And please answer with I will.
I will.
I will.
Chris, I don't think we heard you. We got Bill and Larry.
I will.
Thank you.
questions? Questions from the board first? Yeah. Any questions from the board members?
None, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Any questions from staff?
Township has no
Township.
questions.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna have questions at some point. I just
Yeah,
we
yeah.
jump in right now.
You can. Yep.
Yeah. So my biggest question that I would say is that I'd like to have addressed is the initial plan. If I remember in my notes hold correctly, is the plan is to build a public water supply for the development. And then I believe the maintenance of that is to be handed over. Ownership and maintenance of that facility is to be handed over to a homeowners association. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the current plan. The permit is held by Brookfield Development. So while they are the developer of Devon Creek, they will be owning, operating the public water supply system. They have the right to transfer that permit. One of the conditions that I think you will see later on from the township has to do with that any transfer of ownership and requiring that it be demonstrated that whoever that is transferred to has the financial resources to handle that permit and the responsibilities that come along with it. There's also the certain requirements in those conditions regarding amendment of the homeowners association documents to make sure that homeowners know which water system they're on and to properly account for long-term maintenance of that water system.
And then in the event that the homeowners association dissolves or ceases to make adequate upgrades to that infrastructure, who pays for it?
I don't believe that there is the opportunity to dissolve their responsibility under the permit from DEP. Certainly at that point, if there were financial difficulties, there's the opportunity to again offer it to the city of Lancaster or to any other public water supplier. At that point, we would have to seek they would have to seek DEP permission to transfer the permit and the operations of that facility.
That's to transfer the permit, but what if they just don't make the adequate, like, does DEP make sure that they're making adequate upgrades and maintenance?
Yes,
ongoing?
there's required maintenance schedules through DEP, and you'll also see within the conditions, we've incorporated some of the DEP inspection schedules and the requirements, one of which has to do with having sufficient backup parts and replacement parts readily available. So that you don't run into a situation where something breaks and you now have to wait for 30 days to even get a part. The DEP actually regulates that as well. What parts have to be on site and available. Others are simply redundant already in the system. And we've incorporated that into the conditions that are in front of you.
So those conditions actually are not in front of us to this
They
point.
will be marked momentarily, yes.
Okay, or maybe that's them. Okay,
It is.
yeah, okay, I haven't seen that yet. Okay. Okay, questions, any other questions from the board?
None.
Staff still has no questions. Okay, questions from the public? Yes? Yeah, if you want to, are you part of the public? You
Well-
can.
If you want to save comments, I don't know if township staff has any presentation or,
We're going to be offering the
Yeah.
conditions, but we have no testimony.
Right.
okay.
Okay, so can we do
We can
public?
do that.
Yep, so if you just want to come up and just state your name and your address for the record. And actually, he should be sworn in as well.
Sure.
So
My
why
name
don't you
is
state-
Keith Kirtner, 810 Stumphill Drive. I do. Okay. From the permit application, I understand that this water supply plan is only serve phases 2, 3, and 4 of the development, not phase 1. I'm concerned with Brookfield Development Corporation handling this plan since they cannot get more than a quarter of the way through the build out before having to entirely redo the water supply plans. The fact that they were unable to account for proper system planning, water pressure beyond the first quarter of the development is a clear indication to me that they do not have the technical finesse to do this the right way. Additionally, from the first page of the engineer's report in the permit application, I note that Brookfield will only be operating this system until it's turned over to the Devon Creek Homeowners Association. If a development corporation who does this for a living is unable to properly plan for more than the first 25% of the water system build out, how can a homeowners association with no demonstrated technical or professional expertise be expected to handle the continuous operation and maintenance of a water system that would certainly eventually serve 370 homes, 10 businesses, with a resource that these people will need to live? Even the business plan submitted to DEP and filed with this application only considers the first 5 years, as noted in the purpose and summary action. From pages 7 and 8 of the engineer's report, I understand that the system shall be somewhat automated, but it will require a supply of chemicals, maintenance, reverse osmosis, and membranes, and require an operation to make changes remotely. How can we expect a homeowners association with no demonstrated finesse or expertise to handle this? As stated in the business plan in this application, they are a for-profit LLC. This company will build this system, take its money, and be done with Devon Creek and our community. Based on page 60 and 70 of the permit application, I'm troubled that the financial viability of this system leaves a reserve of less than $10,000, which assumes 100% completion of the system and 100% occupancy. Those numbers are no guarantee given the trouble so far. If a few businesses do not move in or a few homes are not sold, the numbers won't add up. Additionally, if there are any unexpected expenses, such as tank maintenance, well maintenance, treatment costs, this makes the finances not work. If a few homes are unsold and a few unexpenses arise, the system goes substantially in the red. It's apparent to me that the finances of this system are shaky, as well as the system planning. Based on this corporation's inability to build more than 25% of its plan without having to entirely revise the plan, the lack of demonstrated sustainability of the situation, and the thoroughbred financial viability of the stated intention of this corporation to walk away from the system following its completion, I believe we should be deeply troubled. I do not believe the viability of this plan, let alone the prudency of this plan, has been demonstrated, and I respectfully request that this proposal be soundly rejected. Thank you for your consideration. Okay, someone would like a copy of this?
It's okay, we have it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, if you do have comments, you'll have to individually unmute yourselves.
This is Steve Eggleston. I'm online.
Yep, we hear you.
Okay.
I have a question or two.
Actually, yeah, we're going to have to swear you in.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so just give us a second.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You can proceed.
My first question is, what is the homeowners in the neighborhood surrounding this development's recourse when our wells go dry? Many of us have marginal wells as it is, 2.5, 3 gallons a minute at the most. What will our recourse be when these guys pump the groundwater down below our current pump levels? Secondly, and it goes very much to Mr. Kirkner's comments, I'm familiar with water treatment systems and sewer treatment systems. I've run them before, and I had full-time staffs, 1 or 2 guys around the clock and someone on call on weekends and holidays. Is a homeowners association going to have a staff to keep an eye on this system? And the other comment I have and concern from experience, water tanks aren't forever. So when the water tank goes bad, and it will go bad, even with the prescribed maintenance and follow-up that everybody, Ocean, DEP, and everybody puts on water tanks, how is the homeowners association going to finance a new tank?
Okay.
That's my piece.
Thank you. Can we just get your address for the record?
804 Stump Hill Drive.
Thank you. Did you have a comment? Did you want to respond?
I'm happy to respond, and since one, we're not here tonight about the regulations of DEP.
Could you speak up to the mic, please, for those of us that are at home?
We're not here to debate the regulations that DEP has in place for being a public water supplier. We have been permitted by DEP, and they're the sole authority to regulate who can and cannot be a public water provider. We have met all of DEP's regulations as evidenced by the issuance of the permit. But to one of the substantive comments that has come up from both members of the public, the testimony that was previously given at the prior hearing was rather extensive with regard to how the system operates. This is not the first time that a public water service permit has been issued for a system of this nature, and it has been then owned subsequently by a homeowners association. The homeowners association does not run the day-to-day of the public water supply. It would be served by a management company, somebody that is their profession, that is what they do. Mr. Miller testified about those setups extensively at the prior hearing. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. So this is run by somebody else, not directly by the homeowners association. They own it, and it has been demonstrated that it actually will be profitable for them in the future, including cash reserves for necessary maintenance and ultimately for replacement. Just as a homeowners association can, and in this instance is, responsible for maintenance and eventually replacement of roadways within the community.
So would the homeowners association also be our recourse when our wells go dry? Is my next question. What do I do when my well goes dry?
Mr. Miller also testified as to what was done and what is required by DEP to test the system in advance of it being permitted. All of those necessary tests were run. All well owners within proximity of the proposed wellhead were contacted, and it was requested that we allow to have monitors put on their wells. Those that permitted it showed that there was no decrease, and that was pumping at full capacity. Again, Mr. Miller testified as to what those requirements were, the pumping that was done, and the results. So and to the best of my recollection, his testimony was that none of those wells were affected by the pumping and by the testing, and therefore DEP was satisfied with what we had done. I am not an expert on the legal liability for a well owner, but any recourse would be the same as an individual homeowner whose well happens to affect another homeowner's well. Again, regulated by DEP and the regulations of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, not by East Lampeter Township.
Okay, are there other comments? Looks like Robert Hayward, sorry.
Correct. Robert Hayward, 2083 Creek Hill Road.
Okay, we're going to swear you in. 1 second.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
You can proceed.
I ditto Mr. Kirkner's comments and Mr. Eggleston's comments as well. I'm privileged to be part of the Coralville Presbyterian Retirement Community, and we have our own well system here and provide water for everyone here. One of my concerns is not whether the DEP has approved this or what we'll do. What concerns me is, since you got the approval, the regulations we've experienced with water and the preparation and care of water to make sure it continues to be quality has increased significantly over the last 12 months and looks like it's going to continue to increase with intensity as to what will be required to maintain pure water for everyone. So I'm concerned about the users that are going to be there. And I'm also concerned that in my understanding of aquifers over, particularly in the West and other places where pumping has gone on, the decrease in a well use for a short test is not what would happen over a longer period of time, 5-10 years. That is where the real degradation occurs. It's over a period of time, not in the refresh rate that would occur at initially just, doing a test, saying I'm going to pump a lot of water. My concern would be that this, I'm not sure has been completely thought out, and a concern that when the transition occurs, I'm not sure the resources that the homeowners association would have to sustain it. We here have a full-time team member, and we have outside participants as well to provide the quality of the water equally, probably $100,000 a year in just maintaining it. So it's a concern that I don't know that, although it looks good on paper, until it's actually been fully out and run, it would seem to be a degradation in there. So I'd encourage the board to consider a no vote for this change.
Thank you. Any comments? Okay. Any other comments from the public? The township is going to present some testimony as well, so we'll have plenty of opportunity for additional comments. But if you have any comments at this time, please raise your hand so we can tell that you want to make a comment. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't see your name, but something family. Yep.
My name is Lisa Bolello. I'm at 2124 Creek Hill Road.
Thank you. We'll swear you in.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
You can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any recourse for the homeowners that are in the surrounding areas now that the DEP has given its okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Say he can't.
Is there anyone that can answer that question? Okay, we have silence on answering that, but we'll take that comment into the record.
Okay, I also have another question.
Sure.
Is there a way to find out what addresses were used for the DEP study on the impact of the well pressure?
I would believe it's part of the permit application.
I cannot hear you.
My apologies. I believe it's part of the permit application that is also part of the record, so it'd be available through the township, through the record.
So I would be able to access it on the town's website?
I don't know if the township posts conditional use application materials on the website. It'd probably have to be done through a right to know request.
You hear that answer?
I would have to, no, I did not hear the answer.
Yeah,
actually.
so the actual application, which I'm assuming is pretty large, is not on the website. You'd have to come into the township to ask for that information through a right to know request.
To find out which families and which houses were used in this impact study.
Correct. It sounds like that is in the application according to Brookfield Development. But that's as far as we know, we believe it's in that document.
Oh, okay. Here's my last question. Is there any recourse for we, the homeowners in this area, if in fact we notice that the pressure in our wells has dropped after all this has gone through for this development?
Is anyone, are you willing to answer? Make any comment?
I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert, and nor would I be able to give her counsel on that issue.
Okay.
I can speak briefly. My understanding is, so locally, we have no jurisdiction over water. That's a state-run resource in the state of Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is one of the few states, in my understanding, that doesn't allow for that type of recourse. It would be worth contacting your state representative and state senator and asking them to change the law so that all homeowners can have this ability, as they do in many other states.
That is my understanding as well. Supervisor Blowers, that is my understanding as well. We've been in this situation a number of times since I've been on the board. And, if you recall, we've had, similar conversations with residents who surround these issues. And my reading of it is similar to Mr. Demi's is, Pennsylvania doesn't allow for that. There is a set of regulations, but everything that we're being presented with tonight, in fact, in the permit letter, is that DEP has accepted what Brookfield has presented, and they have granted them the permit. So there is minimal recourse. Mr. Demi is correct. It's something that is handled at the state level, and that is where your state representatives and state senators have the greatest impact. So.
Thank you.
And looks like Mr. Reed.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, if you just want to state your name and address, and then we'll swear you in.
Eric Reed, I live at 816 Stump Hill Drive.
Mr. Reed, do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I'd just like to put on record that I am against this well system going in, but I'm curious, you have one section that's already been developed there that's on city water. So why does this new development have to be in a well system? You said the city rejected it, but why?
Mr. Reed, so we had some extensive testimony previously on it. To summarize that the best I can for you, the city of Lancaster determined that due to their obligations at this point, other persons to whom they have guaranteed future water service and the ability to serve, that they don't believe that they could provide adequate residential and fire pressure to the remainder of the development without massive infrastructure improvements, that they were unwilling to make. So they were unwilling to provide that service to us because of how it would impact their ability to provide service to existing customers and to future customers that they had obligations to.
So their unwillingness to provide that infrastructure, so they are asking you to cover the cost of that infrastructure for city water.
Yes, they did.
Correct.
And so this becomes an economic point of impact where you have a development that does not want to spend the money to put a water system off of city water and put a well system in, is how I understand this. It's all based on money.
Feasibility, yes. The infrastructure required by the city to extend water service to the remainder of this community was infeasible.
Well, I'll reiterate the question again. You know, I understand that if the state does not allow us to pursue legal action against Devon Creek or the homeowners association if our wells go dry, it's a travesty because you're going to force a lot of homeowners in the area to pay thousands of dollars to put new wells in. And they may not be able to. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hayward?
Yes, follow up based on Eric's question. So the essence of it is, and I'm late to this party, but the essence of it is, if they paid the money to Lancaster City, they get the water?
I mean, basically, yes.
A mischaracterization of the record, but his
opinion.
How is it a mischaracterization?
It certainly does not at all account for the magnitude of what we're talking about here and the ability, the representations in the past to my client. There's an extensive record as to what transpired between my client and the city of Lancaster and whether they would.
Gentleman needs to speak up to the microphone.
Yep, thank you.
There's an extensive record as to what transpired between the city of Lancaster and my client about the provision of public water through the city system here and what the magnitude of that is. It's not appropriate, I don't believe, for me to debate that with those, making comments this evening. But that's in the record as to what the magnitude of that was. This isn't somebody paying $10,000 to the city of Lancaster to put in a line. This is a massive infrastructure improvement that we ended up in litigation about. And that litigation went on for 2 years trying to figure out how to deal with it with the city of Lancaster. And ultimately, we were able to find a way to provide public water to Devon Creek, which is our obligation under the conditional use requirements. DEP permitted that public water supply. And the city of Lancaster ultimately agreed to settle the litigation with us and to provide an emergency backup connection to the already permitted public water supply system. So if anything, this developer has been very responsible in figuring out a solution to this development when they have already been knee deep in this development and were in the goalposts were changed. Not by this, obviously not by this township, but by others.
I certainly appreciate that response, and I've certainly learned more by it. I'm not ascribing any malicious intent on the developer, but I have developed a number of properties myself and have found often the cost of the infrastructure to be significant. And you're right, it's not 10,000, it's more like 20,000 per home. And that's a significant amount of investment needed. But that's the reality of what is required to get infrastructure put in. But if I understood correctly, that was what was being debated, was the cost of the infrastructure. And I'm not looking for a suit. I'm just looking for a direct answer. If you paid the money, you'd get the water from the city.
If Brookfield Development had acceded to the demands of the city of Lancaster and installed multi-million-dollar improvements that the city of Lancaster wanted to serve this project and others, yes, we would have been able to connect to the city of Lancaster as the public water supplier for Devon Creek.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public at this point? And again, we'll have plenty of opportunity to make additional comments, ask questions. I'm not seeing anyone else raise their hand. For those on the phone, we're asking if you are going to make comment to join the video. I'm not hearing anyone. Okay, at this point, we'll continue the hearing. No?
All right, thank you, Board.
Sure.
For the record, Mel Newcomer on behalf of the township. The township does not have any specific testimony here this evening. I have placed before you in between several of the seats what have been 27, I believe, conditions that have been presented by the township to the applicant. They have been the subject of discussion between the parties and agreement. And so we are presenting these conditions to you this evening, that if the board chooses to grant the conditional use application, that these conditions be imposed as part of that decision process. And they do identify and attempt to safeguard not only feasibility of the operation of this, but also information that will be provided to the township and requirements to be fulfilled to hopefully make certain that the system that has been approved by DEP will remain viable and available to the community. So those are the conditions that the township is proposing be appended to any decision, favorable decision rendered by this board. And that's all that the township has at this particular point.
For the record, sure. The conditions as drafted and as noted in Township Exhibit 1 are acceptable to the applicant. And if the board were inclined to grant the amendment to the conditional use, we would accept those as appropriate conditions in accordance with this board's authority.
I personally, of course, seeing this for the first time, because that's the only way these hearings work. I've read down through 1 through 4, which sound good to me, but there's 27 other items in there. I'm actually going to ask direction from my fellow board members. I feel like.
Oh, I need to see him. I need to read it.
Oh yeah, you don't have a copy.
No,
There's only,
I need
are there any extra copies?
I have a copy. I can print it.
Yeah, I mean.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I appreciate that. But I mean, still, Mr. Chair, I mean, I'm not going to be able to digest 27 conditions in the time of this hearing. I mean, I have to trust that township staff is looking after the interests of the residents of the township, both present and future, as well as adhering to DEP's guidelines and Commonwealth of Pennsylvania law regarding our regulation of this or non-regulation of this. So I have to accept all of that as being taken into consideration when putting these together, but I still need time to look at this.
Okay. Can we accept this in as a,
Why don't we mark this as township?
I didn't take it, I didn't know whether we'd be marking exhibits tonight with report, so I did at the bottom of it mark it as township.
Exhibit 1? Okay. Okay, we'll accept it as Township Exhibit 1.
That's fine.
Okay. I'm assuming this is not on the website. The public can't see this anyway.
This is simply evidence that was presented
Okay.
this evening for the board.
I think the best approach, in my opinion, and I'll ask the fellow board members and solicitor, I think we have to go through each and at least summarize or talk through the main points for the public to hear. And I think that will at least get us, I know we do have another meeting at 7:30, right? Yeah, 7:30. So I think we have to do that at this point if we want a decision made in a, unless we'll have to continue this hearing again. So is that okay with my fellow board members?
Yeah, I agree. I have not had a chance to read it either.
Right.
And I think it's appropriate that we do.
Yeah.
We have how many days to render a decision?
45 from the end of the hearing.
But I mean, I have
Right.
a few
Is that
additional
correct?
questions if we have time for them tonight, more in regards to the legal structure of the homeowners association.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's in here.
It's not.
It's not. Okay. Why don't we do this? Let's start from 1 and let's get as far as we can and see where we get. And Ethan, if that's okay, if we hold your questions for now, or if they come up naturally within one of these, please bring them up. Okay?
So would your intent be to have township staff talk through these?
That'd be
and
great.
Maybe give us a brief summary. It
Yeah.
seems that some of these seem somewhat repetitive or similar in nature, but
Well, let me kind of,
No,
Oh,
you
yeah,
should
no,
hold
you
that.
hold the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomer.
for lack of a better way to do it, I'm just going to read the conditions.
That's fine.
And again, I would emphasize that these were suggested conditions for a pending any decision of approval. It's certainly up to the board to impose whatever reasonable conditions the board may deem appropriate. So number 1 identifies that the applicant, homeowners association, or other owner of the community water system, which has been approved and permitted by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection as a public water system, hereinafter referred to in these conditions as a community water system, shall complete an annual audit report, which shall include the financial information related to the community water system, and provide a copy of that report to the township within 30 days of the issuance of the report, but in no event later than 180 days from the end of the owner's fiscal year. Number 2 provides that all fire hydrants connected to the community water system shall be painted a color to be determined by the first response fire department, different from the color of the fire hydrants which are supplied by the public water system of the city of Lancaster. Number 3, applicants shall submit revised calculations for the community water system to the township and any other required government entity, incorporating the projected water needs for the swimming pool provided as an amenity to community residents. Number 4, applicants shall provide written verification from the city of Lancaster that applicants supplied the approved Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection water supply permit to the city of Lancaster. Number 5, applicants shall provide notes on all future plan submissions that the community water system includes all distribution pipes, valves, and all other apparatuses associated with the system, and that all such apparatuses shall be constructed in accordance with City of Lancaster specifications, with the exception of minor changes such as the color of hydrants and similar items, as if the system were to be a public water system of the City of Lancaster. Applicants shall have the construction inspected by a third-party inspection agency selected from a list of inspection agencies acceptable to the City of Lancaster at the time of inspection to ensure that the construction satisfies these standards. All costs of inspection shall be the responsibility of applicant. Applicant shall provide copies of the inspection reports to township. Number 6, in accordance with DEP regulations, applicant and any successor owners of the community water system shall maintain a readily accessible inventory of all apparatuses in the community water system to ensure that emergency repairs required for the system may be completed without delay. A list of the required inventory shall be provided to the township. Number 7, applicant shall provide a fully executed copy of the service agreement with the City of Lancaster, identified as Exhibit 8 in the conditional use application to the township. Number 8, applicant shall provide a wellhead protection zone easement in accordance with DEP regulations for the well and shall erect appropriate signage identifying the wellhead protection zone. Number 9, applicant shall amend all required declarations, covenants, restrictions, and associated homeowners association documents to reflect the change in the community water system for those properties not served by community water supplied from the City of Lancaster. Number 10, applicant and any successor owners of the community water system shall provide all copies of reports required by Chapter 109 when issued to the township. These shall also be provided to the City of Lancaster. Number 11, applicant and any successor owners of the community water system shall provide to the township copies of all emergency notices related to the community water system when issued to residents. These shall also be provided to the City of Lancaster. Number 12, applicant shall remove the lot on which the well, storage tank, and building are located from all open space requirements for the development. Applicant shall submit a revised open space plan and calculations to ensure compliance with the township zoning ordinance. Number 13, applicant shall comply with section 1925.6 and finding of fact number 72 of the 2008 conditional use decision with respect to buffering and screening. Number 14, applicant shall install a meter approved by the East Lampeter Sewer Authority on the sewer line for the backflow and other discharge from the community water system. Number 15, applicant and any successor owners of the community water system shall allow access by township representatives for meter reading purposes. Number 16, applicant and any successor owners of the community water system shall calibrate the meter no less frequently than annually and shall maintain and replace the meter as needed. Number 17, applicant shall install a dechlorination system at the overflow for the community water system. The location and design of the system shall be approved by the township, and applicant or any successor owner shall properly operate and maintain the system. Number 18, applicant shall enclose the well, concrete pad, and building, including the generator facility, with fencing, including a locked gate, to prevent the community from accessing those areas. Number 19, if and when the streets are offered for dedication to the township, applicant shall provide the township in a written form acceptable to township a utility easement between applicant and township, granting to applicant and its successors an easement for that portion of the community water system to be located within the right-of-way of any public street within the development. Nothing in this condition shall be interpreted to require the township to accept dedication of any street in the future, and township may require financial guarantees and/or other requirements at the time of the proposed dedication and provision of the easement to cover the costs of repairs to dedicated streets within the development as a result of necessary repairs to the community water system. In the event that streets are not accepted for dedication by the township, applicant shall grant the township and/or the East Lampeter Township Sewer Authority any necessary easements for the sewer and storm drainage facilities of ELSA. ELSA being the acronym for East Lampeter Sewer Authority. Applicant shall place a note on the revised and recorded plan confirming the items set forth in this condition. Number 20, the community water system may not be transferred without the current owners first providing to township written information concerning the proposed transfer and the ability of the proposed transferee to properly operate the system. Number 21, applicant and any successor owner of the community water system shall notify township at least 30 days prior to the proposed sale or transfer of the community water system to another person or entity. All requirements of these conditions shall be binding on the successor owner of the community water system, an applicant or the then owner of the community water system. In the event of a subsequent transfer, shall not be relieved of any obligations or requirements of these conditions until the transferee shall have submitted an acknowledgement in writing of its acknowledgement of its obligations under these conditions. Provided, however, that nothing in this condition shall be construed to relieve the transferee of its obligations to be bound by the condition, regardless of whether the transferee submits the written acknowledgement. Number 22, applicant and any successor owners of the community water system shall repair any public street damage to the specifications and acceptance of the township. Number 23, applicant shall provide a revised phasing plan for the entire project and identify changes from the most recent previously approved plan. Number 24, township shall issue no certificates of occupancy for any homes or residential dwelling units that would connect to the community water system until applicant provides documentation from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection that the community water system is functional and operational. Applicant shall provide a notice to any person who enters into an agreement of sale for the purchase of any property in the development prior to DEP's issuance of an operation permit for the system, informing the purchaser that the water system has not been approved for operation and must be approved for operation before a certificate of occupancy will be issued for the dwelling being purchased. The township may include language on the building permit indicating that no certificate of occupancy will be issued for the dwelling until an operation permit for the water system has been issued by DEP. Number 25, applicant shall comply with section 1936.11 of the township zoning ordinance in constructing the improvements for the community water system. Number 26, all conditions imposed in the original conditional use application dated June 17, 2008, as amended in 2010 and 2015, shall remain in full force and effect unless those conditions conflict with the conditions of this decision. In the event of any conflict between those conditions and the conditions of this decision, the conditions of this decision shall apply. And finally, number 27, all conditions shall be binding on the applicant, its successors, and assigns, including but not limited to the homeowners association. Those are the proposed conditions in their entirety.
Thank you. You're fine. You don't have any other comments? Okay. Board, you can.
On this, yeah.
Let's say it again.
I have questions, but not regarding these.
Not regarding, okay.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions.
You don't have any questions? Okay.
No, just a statement. I mean, certainly the 27 conditions capture a great deal of the concern over the owner of the community water system and their communications with the township, the public body. Certainly covers the applicants or the owner of the community water system, their management of the asset or the resource. It's all covered. I think it's capturing that for me, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the concerns that I've had from the beginning is beginning of the most recent review of this and conditioning of this is just the overall marketability and acceptance by purchasers of these properties that they understand what they're getting into. East Lampeter Township does not have a water authority. We do not have a water system. We work with the city of Lancaster we have homeowners who have on-lot wells. It certainly is opening up an opportunity for something very unique for us over the next 20 to 25 years for a very large development, at least phase 2, 3, and 4. I'm not sure about how many homes or properties are in that, but several hundred. It certainly opens up future boards, in the community for a group of citizens, a significant neighborhood, to have something very unique, of this sort, this asset and this service. So, reading through it, it's very clear. I'm understanding it, but it does certainly drive that point home to me, Mr. Chairman, that there certainly is now, if this is approved, there certainly is now a very unique neighborhood and group of residents in Lancaster, in East Lampere Township, who have something and a requirement hanging over them that is unique, to say the least. So, okay, that's just my observation. So, thank you.
I do have one question. So during the testimony, multiple times it's been mentioned that the homeowners association would take ownership responsibility of this community water system.
Microphone, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So multiple times during the testimony, there were comments made that, testimony made that the homeowners association would take ownership of responsibility of the community water system. What actually is the process for the homeowners association to accept that? Is there a vote? Is it a majority of folks? Can you talk through that?
So without giving a primer on planned communities, and I think this may be part of what Supervisor Demi may be asking for. So generally speaking, when we go through land development process, one of the conditions of any approval at the end of a land development approval is to prepare homeowners association documents that are then reviewed and approved by the township solicitor to make sure that they conform to the Planned Community Act or other applicable statutes. Those statutes govern how you handle finances of homeowners association, what disclosures must be in those homeowners documents, which is an important point Supervisor Blowers raises, to make sure that the homeowners that are purchasing in any community know what they are purchasing and what their community association dues are going to be, because there has to be a budget. So in this instance, we must, and one of the conditions talks about amending our declaration and making sure that appropriate documentation for the homeowners exists so that all of that budgetary information is there, so that any homeowner that purchases in phases 2 through 4 is aware of what the homeowners association owns, what it is likely to own. Getting straight to the question at the end, ultimately, or at the outset of a homeowners association, it's under usually what's called declarant control. There are certain regulations for how long declarant control lasts. It's because the developer must be able to control that homeowners association for a period of time. They also obviously have the largest stake in any of the improvements and the infrastructure at that time. But the Planned Community Act controls how a declarant can then turn over that association to the residents when they must do so. For example, there are streets in this community that are ultimately going to be owned by the homeowners association. So the documentation will provide that the homeowners association will take ownership of those. It is our current plan that the homeowners association will take ownership of the water system. So that will be provided for in those documents. And that is something that will be done during declarant control, so that the homeowners association is in fact at that point responsible, becomes the permittee with DEP, and thus is responsible to all the conditions with DEP and all the budgetary guidelines, all the reporting guidelines, and having obviously an operator on board to operate and maintain that system for them.
Okay, thank you. Ethan, do you want to answer your questions? Then we'll go to
Can you share a draft of that document with us?
It will have to be reviewed by your solicitor, absolutely.
Do you have a copy?
I do not. It has not been drafted at this point. That's usually drafted during the land development process, not during the conditional use process.
And what is the process for dissolving it?
For dissolving the homeowner association, I do not know. I do not practice Uniform Plan Community Act. Dissolving a homeowners association is not an easy task, but I don't know exactly what the rules and regulations are for that.
other questions?
So you mentioned prior that there was plenty of other similar homeowners associations locally that had their own public water supplies. Could you provide some examples?
I did not say plenty. I said there are others. We are not unique. And I believe Mr. Miller actually testified to one or two of those in the prior hearing. So if anybody is going to answer that question, I think it would need to be Mr. Miller, who is available.
Mr. Miller, he's already been sworn in from the last meeting, or do we have to swear in again?
He was sworn in.
Okay, Mr. Miller, if you can answer that question. You're on mute.
He has to.
There we go. In Lancaster County, there's a number of homeowners associations that operate their own public water system. A couple of the larger ones would be the Hawk Valley community up in the Denver area. Another one to the east of you, and again, it'll be interesting because they will have to dissolve. I guess that they were just taken over by Lake Hawk Township, but they had their own public water system at the Watson Run development up to a period of about 4 months ago. So now they are now serviced by the Lake Hawk Township water system. But there's a lot of large community systems that are mobile home parks that basically operate under the ownership of the mobile home park owner. But we have ones that we're involved with operating that are, 200-300 homes inside of those mobile home parks that, they pay a monthly fee, very similar to what will happen at Devon Creek. And the monthly fee in turn pays for the continual operation and the continued support of the system in the future for modifications and those ever non-ending changes that the DEP comes along with for us to comply with in the future as well. And again, that whole process and how that's budgeted is all in the permit application and was a requirement of how we were going to do that and what rates were going to be and how the funding was going to take place. So all that, without rehashing it of what's already in the document, is in place for this development to move forward and to actually be profitable and be able to, in the long future, be able to physically replace the entire plant in time. So again, the funding mechanism is in place for it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Demi, any other questions?
It's just one of the things that I would be looking for is, since we have examples of communities that do have public water systems, and I think Mr. Miller brought up the one, our neighbor, who recently, if you've been following, they've had issues with their water system now for over a decade, and then they finally got rid of it. And now guess who has, the last guy holding the bag is now Lake Hawk Township. And that's my biggest concern here is typically what I've seen, and again, I haven't looked as much at the data of outside of sort of central Pennsylvania, but when you have homeowners associations that have large infrastructure projects that are required to maintain, the maintenance is usually attainable, but when it comes time to do full replacement of that infrastructure, often that cost is too much for that homeowners association to bear, and they start going to other people for help. And this was, DEP ended up getting involved in Watson's Run and put in a whole bunch of infrastructure. So our taxpayers went to it, tax dollars, as well as now Lake Hawk Township is holding the bag. So that's my biggest concern, is that we're sort of, homeowner associations, yes, is difficult, and some can be dissolved with an 80% vote. Some it requires 100% of all owners and mortgage holders to dissolve something. But as we know from other developments by the same developer, that is something that they do believe is achievable in those circumstances. And I think is achievable in this circumstance. So I'd want to see some sort of guarantee that if a homeowners association dissolves for some reason, the developer sort of comes back into the picture. So we're not the ones holding the bag at the end of the day. And if it's completely unreasonable to believe that the homeowners association will fail, then I think that's a condition that they would be willing to take.
So none of these conditions talk about, they talk about successor assignees and so forth. I can't remember which one it was. It talks about transferring 20. Right, it talks about street damage.
There's nothing that
Right.
states that.
Right.
No.
Yeah, that's something that we would
Yeah,
have
it's
to
not there. We have to,
discuss
we have,
and
we have to
discuss
discuss.
around potentially, but yeah, we all agree.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Supervisor Demi, for bringing up the Watson's Run development. I was hoping that Mr. Miller would bring that up as an example, because I followed that one very closely, and it was looking at these conditions and hearing Mr. Lewis's testimony and hoping that at some point we would see signs that perhaps maybe the city of Lancaster is revisiting their approach to this and could in fact see themselves taking this system over at some point in the future. Because I'm concerned, as Mr. Demi is, that we end up in a situation where we've got taxpayers who are now in 25 years living in this development, and yes, they joined a homeowners association. Yes, they recognize the disclosures, but the cost of replacing that asset in 25 years may become a reality for folks that they're not seeing that as they're signing the agreement in 2022. And I'm concerned about providing services to this, not so much concerned about the development, but just ensuring that there's adequate public services going there. The condition or the agreement, Mr. Lewis, with the city of Lancaster to provide the emergency supply, is that sign that the city of Lancaster is seeing their way forward in how they're looking at this now, or are they still where they were?
I would not interpret it that way, no.
Okay.
The requirement to have an emergency backup was one, to satisfy DEP, and also certainly a discussion item with the township staff. I would not put it on the record as a way to interpret that the city of Lancaster is revisiting this. Merely anecdotally.
Microphone, please.
Speak up, please.
Merely anecdotally, if the system is up and operating and becoming profitable, as we are expecting that it will be, I would imagine that makes it much more attractive to the city of Lancaster in the future. Whether or not it would then be offered to the city of Lancaster to take over at that point in time would be up to whomever the owner is at that point in time.
Understand. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you.
Okay. We'll accept questions from the public regarding the conditions and frankly, any other questions or comments. Looks like Mr. Hayward first.
Yes, would it be possible to add a condition of, for the homeowners association, that if in some future time there is a degradation in neighbors' wells because of their water system, that they would assist us in resolving that issue economically?
I don't think Pennsylvania law allows it.
Comments from the board first.
That would be discussed. Our solicitor would have to give us guidance on whether that is possible.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments, solicitor?
No, not now.
Not
No.
at this time.
See what the applicant's
Okay.
responses.
Applicant, do you have any comments to that?
That type of condition, I believe, is inappropriate and exceeds the authority of the Board of Supervisors. And maybe it's time to address that. We talked about it with staff. We talked about this condition, and I know it is of concern to people. But what we have to remember is the separation here in terms of what the various authorities are. Our obligation under our 2008 conditional use approval and moving forward is to satisfy the East Lampeter Township zoning ordinance. And the East Lampeter Township zoning ordinance requires that the development be served by public water supply. Originally, that was the city of Lancaster providing that public water supply. We now have a permit for an alternative public water supply. That alternative public water supply is regulated by DEP. So the operations of that public water supply, how it runs, who it can provide water to, what the facilities must be, those types of items, and what the obligations and liabilities of that public water supplier are all governed by DEP and state law. I understand completely that the Board of Supervisors are obviously concerned about their own residents and so forth, but that doesn't then transfer to the Board of Supervisors authority to govern a public water supplier. I think that's the distinction that we have to make. And it would not be acceptable to my client to incur liability that they don't have under state law currently, or that no other public water supplier would have currently under state law. We would be subject to the same requirements as every other public water supplier because we are governed by DEP. And that's the same with some of the other concerns with respect to ongoing liability and things of that nature. Again, regulating the public water supplier, I don't believe is appropriate for the Board of Supervisors. That is a DEP issue, and it's solely their jurisdiction. I understand the concern, and the more we can vet and the more we can address, great, but there are certain items that, in fact, fall solely within the purview of DEP.
Okay. Thank you. We have a comment from Mr. Reed.
I may have missed it. I'm not sure at what percentage of the development that needs to take place before the homeowners association takes over with maintenance of this well system.
Applicant.
Again, it will be governed by the homeowners association documents and the Uniform Plan Community Act when you go from what is called declarant control to homeowner controls. And there are several different triggers under the Uniform Plan Community Act, one of which is 90% construction. There are other time limitations that after a certain period of time, the declarant must also be willing and able to cede control of any of the facilities or cede control of the homeowners association to the actual resident. So that's all governed by the Uniform Plan Community Act.
Okay. I only have one other comment, and it's more for the board. Based on the plan here to put this well in and based on the information that's been given. So by doing a more cost-effective, the well versus the city water issue transfers that authority over to DEP, which in turn removes the oversight of a well system from the township there. And now you've taken the liability from the developer and completely put it on the taxpayers if this system runs amok. Because we have no recourse, according to what you're saying, of the law if our wells go dry. So I would like the supervisors to take that in consideration. Who's bearing the liability of this now?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Mr. Hay, were you waving again?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the council's, very appropriate words supporting his client, and ditto with Eric, the reality that as a taxpayer currently paying for all the infrastructure and whatnot that has been approved in weeks and months past, that I would again ardently, strongly support you vote against this, because I think the clarity needs to be done when it impacts neighbors on their wells and leaving us high and dry, as the case may be. I pray for you as you make your decision.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Okay, any other comments from board members?
Mr. Chairman, Council, do we have, we have had these conversations many times in the past, and DEP is the regulator of this. I mean, in the end, it does fall to DEP. They have issued a permit and have provided approval for the solution that the applicant has come up with. Mr. Reed has suggested that by accepting this, we are transferring responsibility. We conditioned this in 2008, I believe in 10 and in 15, that this developer could move forward if there was a public water supply that was provided. That was the only condition that was guiding this situation, if I'm correct. in 2008, before I was on the board, the condition was is work through this with the city of Lancaster, and that's your public water supply. I mean, or are we in fact transferring responsibility or authority over something that we conditioned away, I guess, is the way I'm thinking of this. We said to the applicant, go find a public water supply, provide it, show that it will provide the necessary water service for this. And when you do that, you're going to meet the conditions we placed upon you. Didn't we transfer that to the applicant at that time? Said, go find service. And they came back to us and they found service.
Yeah, I was trying to put my hands on the actual condition in the original decision, but the approval's already been granted by the board to have a public water system. What the applicant is coming in is a request for a modification of that condition under these circumstances. And as this case has evolved from when it was initially presented, I think they've managed to dot the i's and cross the t's and now have the approval from DEP. So that is the position they're in, and that's the case before you now.
That's my understanding of the situation before us as well. And then my understanding is from the vantage point, not as a attorney who specializes in this, but DEP is guiding this. These are regulations in the state of Pennsylvania that are driven by state statute and regulatory bodies that this board has no control over. And we have had, I mean, I can think of at least two prior to this over the past couple of years where the homeowners want this board as a local body representing them, neighbors, to guarantee that wells will not be compromised or to guarantee that water service will be there. And every time we do that, council has told us DEP controls this. We don't have control over that. I can't hold someone accountable for their actions that can't be proven that they impacted someone else's well, and that DEP is the body that's regulating this, and I have very little control over it. That's my understanding, Mr. Chairman. That's sort of where I'm at.
Thank you. Thanks for the comments.
I'll speak a little more broadly, and then of course we will have to deliberate with the solicitor to find out. There's what we'd like to do, and then there's the reality of the achievable. So we'll be looking at that. But broadly, I think this township has done a good job over the last multiple decades of limiting growth within our urban growth boundary and saying that we preserve farmland, we think it's valuable, and we do want to see development happen where there is existing public infrastructure. The Lancaster City is our public water supply. This would be another public water supply, and DEP can approve multiple public water supplies. So the DEP currently is providing the oversight of the Lancaster City Water Supply and Sewer Authority. But what you're seeing more broadly, if you look at these things, is the infrastructure cost is significant. And every time that infrastructure comes up for renewal, what you're seeing in the city is not necessarily mismanagement. It's the fact that water infrastructure is very expensive, and they're running up against the same replacement costs as you go through multiple times replacing these large pieces of things. So a large, well-run water supply, public water supply regulated by DEP is having difficulties with the exact same things. So the solution isn't necessarily to create a duplicate of it, let one fail, and then have a bunch of small ones take their place so that they can fail in 60 years as well. But what I'm also concerned with is if we start to make the motion that, or the move towards any public water supply that exists that you can get passed by the state, that now opens essentially, we can still try to control it in other ways, but now you can put a development anywhere you want. Any farm in East Lampeter Township is now under potential threat because, oh, we just dig a well, sell it to the homeowner association, sell houses, and then move on and do the next one. So I think our original ordinance, as written, our zoning ordinance, which stated we have development, and this this development checked all those boxes when it was initially approved, which was it is in the urban growth boundary. It's along a major corridor. It has access to public water already, which was why it was then approved. What I'm reading is we're now being asked to change that condition to say, all right, we're shifting to a different public water supply. And I think that is in our purview to do. But I understand the concerns of the neighbors, even though we don't have a whole lot of recourse with wells running dry. But I think what you're seeing is when you have a large water system, there's a lot of risk and that maintenance cost becomes great. And I think what you're seeing here is the initial installation of new infrastructure is relatively cheap, but the risk is now being functionally spread out over everyone in that aquifer. And we don't know for sure whether wells are going to run dry or not. And there's really no way to tell until you do it, but the risk is there. But that liability is being shifted, in my opinion, to the neighborhood. And there's not a whole lot we can do about that specific piece of it. But that's where the cost comes down, is when you take the liability and shift it to a whole bunch of people that don't have a lot of say in the matter.
I have a question, gentlemen.
Yeah. Actually, can you hold 1 second? There was a hand in the room, and then I will go back to you next.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep. Sure.
Hi, I'd just like to clarify this, when we go to wells, it's not a public system, because a public system, and it keeps getting referred to here as a public water system, which if it was, it would be available to other people, but it's going to be focused just in this development. So, and obviously if it was a public system, then PUC would have some regulations under also. So,
Yeah,
but
it is a public system. It is permitted by DEP as a public water supply system. It is a public water supply permit. So whether or not somebody else believes it's public because it's available to the general public is not what's at issue. It is a public water supply in accordance with DEP regulations.
But it's limited to that development.
Correct.
At this point, it is limited only to Devon Creek because that's what it's permitted for.
Okay. But that could change.
Yeah. So
somebody could seek an amendment to that permit to try and provide infrastructure to others. Sure. I think they.
I mean, that's how other water systems expand and become, but no one's allowed to just join a public water system at will. Currently, you have to still apply, and it's within a designated boundary established by DEP.
Which is part of how it all started with, the designated water supplier. And we were in a particular control zone for the city of Lancaster. They were obligated, as we set forth in our litigation, they were obligated to provide us water service. And they effectively refused to do so because they refused to install the infrastructure necessary to meet their obligation. That's what our litigation was all about. That's why we ended up in this situation. If I can, just back to a point here. Again, there are certain, and I think Mr. Bellars, you're getting to it. There are certain authority and certain regulations that you enforce as East Lampeter Township and a Board of Supervisors, and there are certain authority that is delegated to a higher power, higher authority, DEP here for public water supply. It's not just the condition imposed in 2008 on the conditional use that there is a public water supply. It's actually written specifically in your zoning ordinance. Zoning ordinance simply says, well, not simply, because it's one of the most complicated zoning ordinances you'll ever find, but to Mr. Demi's point, there were very specific criteria that had to be met to get approved for an optional design incentive development. And this piece of ground developed as Devon Creek checked all those boxes. It was months and months and months of testimony meeting all those, and quite frankly, years of design going in before we even got to conditional use. One of those criteria that no one really ever thinks is going to be that big of an issue is public water supply. And that's why your ordinance merely says, demonstrate to us you have public water supply, and you check that box. We did check that box. And at that time, everybody figured there's only one public water service provider, so that's who it will be. Again, our obligation is simply, with respect to public water supply, is to provide public water supply. And I submit to the board, while I completely understand the concerns, and I think my client has gone pretty far in terms of discussing with staff and agreeing to 27 conditions to kind of try and allay some of the fears. the authority that the board has is limited because it has been delegated to DEP. And I'd submit to this board that the record contains the evidence that we need to put on, which is we have public water supply permitted and governed by DEP. If East Lampeter Township, and I mentioned this to staff during our discussions, if East Lampeter Township wants to get into the business of regulating all public water suppliers within the community and imposing obligations on all public water suppliers in the community, my client or the owner of this system would be hard pressed to argue that they're being treated unfairly. But I don't think that this one public water supplier can be treated any differently than any other public water supplier. And so if there is liability that exists, all public water suppliers will be subject to that same liability.
I have a follow-up question for staff on that one. Since I was not here during those initial negotiations of the design and build out and the multiple phases, is it staff's recollection that the city water and the applicant as well as township all just was water fine then, or was that actually discussed as part of that initial discussion before we actually approved this?
Microphone.
Ralph Hutchison, Township Manager. I may be the only person in this room other than Mr. Lewis who was involved at that time. As Mr. Lewis has said, at that time, the only public water supplier in the township was the city of Lancaster, and they were in fact designated as the public water supplier in this area. So I would say, yes, it's fair to assume that the township staff at that time believed that the city of Lancaster was going to be the water supplier for this development.
And do you remember the city expressing any concern with providing water supply to this development?
My recollection is that there were conditions imposed by the city, requirements imposed by the city for providing service. And they required that the first, and I forget the number of homes, but the first number of homes in the first phase that was being developed were required to have additional equipment, pressure tanks, I believe, installed in those homes in order to be properly supplied. Somewhere in the process of developing those homes, the city decided that that was not required. So I don't believe all of those homes actually have those pieces of equipment in them, although it was originally anticipated that they would. That's my recollection.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? Okay.
No, no.
And any other comments from East Lampeter Township? Oh, there was a comment.
Mr. Eagleton?
Yeah, I apologize. Yes, public comment.
Well, I think we're playing games with words here. You're going to drill one 12 or 18-inch well and pump 76,000 gallons a day into a 300,000 gallon tank. What is the difference between that and everybody in the neighborhood having their own well, like Creek Hill and Stumpville Drive and Horning Road have? I think you're playing games with words. And I can see the steamroller coming, so I'm going to step out of the way here because we're going to get smashed, and you guys aren't going to do anything about it for us. And I'm really disappointed. It's a travesty.
Thank you. Anyone want to comment to the land development plan and former conditional use hearing, or?
Well, I guess we represent the interests of the citizens of the township. We represent the interests of citizens that are here now and citizens that will be here in the future. And in doing that, we have a zoning ordinance, we have a comprehensive plan. We work through the building and the development codes to ensure that proper housing or building stock is coming and it's supported. Mr. Demi's statements were perfect. I would concur with everything he said and how he framed that. I'm just not quite sure how the citizens who are speaking, how they see our actions as somehow steamrolling them or ignoring them or throwing them under the bus. We have to go back to 2008 and what was put in place and what the developer has done to honor that. We have state regulation that is guiding us and or requiring us to step out of the way. I just wholeheartely disagree with the comments that were just made about what we're doing as a board. I unequivocally believe that we are doing what we need to do according to the conditions that were set in place in 2008, what our comprehensive growth plan was designed to do, what we are required to do or not to do under state law, what DEP is asking us to do. I don't agree with the categorization that somehow we're steamrolling the residents and that we're requiring them to get out of our way. That is not at all what this board is doing.
Okay, I'm going to close testimony at this time.
Can I make one comment?
Yes, you can, Mr. Reed.
It seems like the city of Lancaster, if I understand this correctly, its infrastructure may be getting stretched in certain areas. So you now have developers coming in and saying the cost to put that infrastructure in is too high. Therefore, I create an alternative by building this well system, which is a large capacity system. And you're going to set a precedence by allowing developers, with what Mr. Devon was saying earlier, that, hey, we can get around this with the city. And like I said before, the liability, once a developer has developed it in the well system, they can walk away once the HOA is taken over. And it doesn't become their responsibility. And then it becomes out of the township's responsibility, not that they have much because the city of Lancaster controls the water, except for in a well system, the DEP is now the authority. So once again, the liability just goes away to the taxpayers, and they're going to end up being responsible for whatever happens to their property. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, I am going to close testimony at this time.
Excuse
she
me?
was waving. I did see you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you go, and then I'm definitely closing testimony after that.
Okay.
time.
All right. I'm sorry. I
Sure.
really just wanted to get, in regard to how we, the homeowner residents in the area, feel about what all is taking place right now, and some of the comments that you're hearing from the other residents about feeling very, a lot of anxiety over what's going on. I believe, and I've only had the house not even 2 years here on Creek Hill Road, and I've never had well water before either. But that said, it seems like this is something that's gone back to 2008. So as many members are playing catch up because they're not familiar with what happened in 2008, which brings you now to the 2020, it seems like you have, if I'm not mistaken, 45 days in which to vote or respond to this proposal. Maybe it would be in everyone's benefit to review what was proposed and how it's being changed and altered now with community input. And I don't know if there needs to be anything further to look at, because there are concerns, obviously, from we, the residents in the area about how this will impact us in the future. And it feels like an hour's worth of time that's, been presented, where this is a much larger issue. And that is my concern. And the fact that, this impact, we as residents really don't feel that there is, much we can do in the future if in fact our wells run high and dry after, the vote has been made. And, that's where the steamroller, might, be what people are feeling. That's my comment.
Thank you. And I'll comment on that. Again, state law describes that we have to make a decision in 45 days from the end of the testimony, and we will be following state law. If you do want to see any of the past documentation, every single one of these conditional use hearings is court reported, and that information is available via the township, via the Right to Know Act. So all of those documents are available, but we have to make a decision. So we will deliberate as a board under the conditional use hearing rules with the solicitor to come up with a written decision per state law. You have one more comment before I close testimony?
Merely asking that applicants exhibits A16 and A17 be admitted into the record.
Yes, yes. We A16, A17, and Township Exhibit 1 are in the record. So I will close testimony and the meeting is adjourned.
Okay, so you're going to render a decision in 45 days.
In 45 days.
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the public for their participation.
No, thank you.